Katrin, with love, it is with such a great pleasure and honor to welcome you today to the Divine Union podcast.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, so excited. So let's dive in. I would love to just start by getting a feel for your journey into this work around sexual liberation and really owning one's pleasure. What's been your journey? How did you come into this work? What were some of the challenges that brought you into this work?
Mm. If back in the day you had told me that I would be in the space of sexuality, in the space of erotic expression and playfulness, and that's what I would support women with in their process, I probably would have created an Excel spreadsheet to explain all the reasons why you had me confused with someone else. That was not going to be me, okay? There was a sense of discomfort in my system with even saying the word sex, with exploring parts of me that I had shut down, right? My yoni, my vulva, my vagina, that was just a no-go zone. And I wasn't even quite sure why, but I was not that kind of girl. There was a curiosity, but that didn't quite align with action, even in the beginning parts of my story before shit hit the fan, so to speak. And typically, our pain brings us to our purpose. So, my story did have quite a foundational level of physical pain that basically introduced me to this entire path of what claiming my sexual freedom would look like, because I definitely didn't feel free when I first tried to have PIV, penis and vagina sex, with my boyfriend at the time at 18 years old. So I'll just paint the picture of that moment that kind of set the red flag up for me. And of course, there were other little red flags leading up to that experience. And I only put the pieces together later on. But that initial red flag was me and my partner in his bedroom back when he was living with his parents still. We were both excited, nervous as well. But I would say the excitement was also at the forefront. I was sexually aroused. I loved him. I trusted him. We knew we wanted to take this next step in our relationship sexually. And we tried to have PIV sex, but what he was met with was this brick wall between my legs, the Great Wall of Vagina, as I like to call it. It just wouldn't budge, and my body wouldn't allow him inside. And so at first we felt, okay, well, maybe, the nerves of the first time. We hear in our society quite often, it's supposed to hurt, which also sometimes creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of protection. But the next few times we tried again and nothing changed, except for the fact that if he would penetrate just a little bit, it would feel like the most excruciating pain that I had ever felt, like a knife being warmed over the fire and slowly inserted into this most tender part of myself. So that's kind of where my story began.
Talk to me. This is such a, I feel so far, common journey, this feeling of pain, or at least in my own experience, this feeling of uh, not being fully open during the process of sex. Where does this come from for you? Like,
Yeah.
what do you make of this in this moment? And what happens?
Yeah, putting the pieces together of all the potential causes for this closing was such an interesting journey. And it really took me about 6 years to get to a place of openness, which really is synonymous with a place of safety. And so, in many ways, I feel like this question asks, what are the reasons that your body, that your mind, that your soul didn't quite feel safe to open to this most vulnerable experience that we have as women, which is literally letting another human being inside of us? Like, that's a big deal.
Mhm.
And hence, it is a protective mechanism that activated within my system. And I needed to put the puzzle pieces together to understand, why is it that my body was subconsciously protecting itself in this involuntary contraction, which really was that pelvic floor muscles were tightening, they were bracing, they were holding back and moving away from that experience.
Mhm.
And again, there's so many pieces to that, but a really big one for me was the stress that I was holding within my system ever since being raised in a bit of a chaotic household. So even that underlying level of stress and not feeling safe to be in my body, to take up space, to express myself, that is probably something that everyone in the world can relate to.
Mhm.
But to be more specific as well, there was a subconscious fear specifically to the masculine that I uncovered over my time of noticing the emotional processing that still needed to happen. Why is it that, I was able to have a semi-successful pelvic exam down the line, but I still wasn't able to have a partner inside of me? There was this lack of trust of another human being's sense of doing something to my body. Even though I consciously trusted him, there was a subconscious distrust in the masculine. And that came from how I perceived my father as one of the first imprints in my childhood, how he and my mom, his relationship was pretty, on the rocks sometimes and quite chaotic. I perceived the masculine as someone who didn't create that protection for myself in which I could rest. Someone that maybe, was explosive at times. I needed to walk on eggshells around. Those were the lived memories that were still in my body and impacting my interaction intimately with a partner. Curious if you can relate to that.
Totally. This is so deep, so beautiful. I'm so happy that you're bringing this to light. This is the theme that we both have within our work, albeit different angles. That it's really, I'm loving what I'm hearing so far, and I'm excited to dig in more around healing this relationship with the masculine
Mhm.
and how that's impacting how you're showing up in the bedroom. I'd be curious. So what does one do? So you're in this moment, you have these insights. Okay, wow, I had this experience in childhood where I didn't feel that maybe my father was a stable presence in the relationship that he had with my mother. And so it causes some mistrust for the masculine. How did you, what is this process of rewiring that? And how did that unfold as it relates to your body as well? So that all of the folks who are listening can think into how it may play into their own sex life, this like closure, maybe this mistrust. I'm going to rephrase that because I actually have another question that comes. Yeah. What are the signs that you know that you mistrust the masculine? So maybe the pain, there may be other things that come. And then what do you do from there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. What are the signs? And first, I just want to paint the picture of the signs outside of myself, which acted as a mirror to really lead me to what I noticed within myself, which really is at the core of what I needed to work with. One of the signs in the first place was the lack of safety of being able to be vulnerable with my emotions, to express to my partner what I was feeling in the first place. And in times of conflict, this is especially exacerbated, right? I was the kind to sheepishly want to sway away from that interaction, that directedness that conflict sometimes provides, that, I was subconsciously fearful of where that would lead. The abandonment wound is a big one. That was something that I experienced, even though my parents are still together. There always seemed to be this like risk of, are we going to fall apart as a unit? And the masculine seemed to have so much more dominance when it comes to the decision making on that. He felt like he had the control around that decision. And naturally, that had me be a lot more wary about truly revealing my heart. And before we close in the yoni, we always close in the heart. And that's the first protection layer that comes up. And so I needed to realize, how is my heart closed to the masculine outside of myself? And what does that really show about my own inner man? My own inner man, for one, was overworked in the first place, right? So he was already fatigued and tired. And that was because I put so much pressure on him. When I was little, my parents let me know in a kind way, but still in an impactful way, that I was supposed to be a boy. I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me, and they were expecting a boy. The doctors told them, yep, that's you're gonna have the $1 million family, as my dad called it. And my name was even going to be Alex. Like there was this identity that was already painted of what life I would live and how I would bring a sense of pride to the family, being the boy. And hearing that, I subconsciously created this understanding that that would have been the ideal. My parents would have been proud. My grandfather really wanted a grandson. And this created this association that there's a hierarchy between the masculine and feminine. Also, in the way that my dad treated my mom, and in the way that her emotions were labeled as chaotic and irrational and not appropriate, there was a constant disconnection and distancing from my own inner feminine because I placed so much importance on the inner masculine. So here I was trying to be a tomboy. I was a tomboy, in fact. I was trying to be like all of the qualities that I thought made me valuable in my dad's eyes. So my inner man was on a pedestal, and I had repressed my inner feminine, that water of emotional expression, of energy, of movement that flows in the bank of the river and the rock that really is masculine. So I shut that part of myself down. And I really needed to look within to see, where is the disbalance? Why is my masculine feeling like he's treated unfairly? He's overworked. He's put his head down in the books for way too long, trying to be the good girl identity that I took on. And where does that inner woman want to just feel safe to be without having to do and to perform?
I love this so much because there's so much in common here. And I can totally relate. And it's this conditioning of the patriarchy, which is a system that affects all human beings. It's never men versus women, but it's this conditioning of the system that also, in my childhood, my entire family, no one has the sensitivity that I have. No one could understand it. And so I shied away from my sensitivity, my sense of intuition, my sense of reading a room, reading people, feeling, right? That feminine, that yin going inwards. And I favored that for, oh, I'm just too much. I'm too emotional. So I disconnect from the feminine. So I can totally relate. And this is what happens then as women when we go into this it's wounded feminine and wounded masculine energy of overgiving, like, overworking, doing so much, not being able to rely on other people because it's viewed as weakness in our society, in our system. And how do we rewire that? And I'm so curious your experience. And what I will say as well, which I feel like there's going to be a similarity, just what I know of you and your work, is it's me healing my masculine made way for me to be in my feminine. It allowed me to surrender. It allowed me to relax. And it's something that I feel many people don't understand. Can seem backwards until you know it, until you've been through it. Then you understand, wow, my entire life I thought I was in my feminine, people pleaser, connection, cooking dinners for my man, sexy outfits. But that wasn't true femininity because I wasn't receiving, I wasn't surrendering, I wasn't trusting. I'm curious your experience with that, how you put that into your words, how this lands for you. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. You really need to look at the masculine piece before the feminine can feel like she has the space to come to the forefront, to be held by that inner masculine. The protective body response that I experienced, which in our society it's called vaginismus, unfortunately, it's still labeled as a sexual dysfunction, which is such a disempowering way to look at it because you take on the identity of being dysfunctional. But this, it really is a protective response. And for me, it was very much synonymous with having found safety in control.
Mm.
In my childhood, I needed to be in control of the only things that I felt like I had access to control, like my good grades, like my extracurricular activities, like the way that my room looked, because everything out there was outside of my control and it was chaotic and it was just too much for my nervous system to handle. And so this survival mechanism of being in control goes hand in hand with the structure, the rigidity, the preciseness, the decision-making ability, and the value with logic, right? Being in the mind that really served me at that time in order to feel safe in my circumstances, in my environment. And so I built up this skill set of how to feel okay despite the chaos, and that tied into the inner masculine just building up as what I thought was a healthy part of myself. But in fact, it overpowered the balance in the inner union that was necessary for me to actually feel like a whole, complete, nourished human being. Whereas the feminine, and when, in the journey of overcoming this protective response, we really are learning to move from safety and control to relinquishing that and finding safety and surrender. Literally, my entire life so far, and not only in this context, but I feel like also in other relationship dynamics and the financial journey is all about finding that safety and surrender and trust in life in general, trust in the unknown of life. Being in a space where we need to grasp onto things to have that tight grip on life, that is this false sense of safety, and only opening the palms up and giving life the opportunity to put something there once you're no longer gripping on and to have that practice of the skill to receive. That is so much of where the beauty for me um, came to be, right? So first I needed to learn to receive pleasure, self-care, nourishment, gifts without the guilt of needing to return back the favor, right? It's those tiny little examples. And then I could even open up the conversation about like abundance, financial abundance, holding the responsibility of that, knowing that I'm deserving of receiving good things. And that's where that marriage is, I feel like, the push and pull between the masculine and feminine to create the union.
Mm. I want to repeat this, what you said, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful piece. This finding safety in the surrender.
Mhm.
And it's such a difficult thing, even for me, to continue to work with that. And this is an element of my work. So, what advice would you give, Katrin, to folks who are like, yes, okay, I get it on a mental level. Maybe they've got some Capricorn Virgo vibes like me. What advice would you give them of how to find that safety in the surrender? Whether it's affirmations, what's your process to coming back to that space when if someone maybe feels like, ooh, life is giving me lemons right now, or like, ooh, this isn't feeling good. How do you stay in that space?
In my experience, really the first step has a lot to do with the nervous system. And we quite often overlook this part, especially when we have found a lot of value out of the logical, learning, knowledge, wisdom kind of gathering that has helped us understand things in the past. And that has, again, a lot to do with the mind, but the nervous system is dropping into the body and down regulating the nervous system to a state that feels like it can hold a wider capacity of sensation. So many of us may do all of the emotional work on a mental level, the erotic exploration, even the physical relaxation exercises, let's say, whether it's vaginismus related or otherwise, but none of those are actually going to land unless our nervous system is in a receptive state.
Mhm.
I was stuck in a freeze, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. It's those survival mechanisms that, again, have served us in the past, but we need to flip the switch into a downregulated state rather than this consistent, like, I got to do, I got to achieve, I need to fight and run and whatever it may be. So, a nervous system reset right off the bat. The exercises that I'm a huge fan of are called tension and trauma releasing exercises, but really they are this natural mechanism that the body has of activating the self-cleaning function of the body, just like animals know how to do this in the wild. And it looks like a tremoring response. That tremoring response we may have felt during orgasm. We may have felt in other vulnerable situations. We may have felt walking up to the front of the class to present something in school where that little sheet of paper that you're holding onto your script is like dancing in your hand because your hand is shaking, it's tremoring. And in fact, we see that response sometimes as a weakness. We feel like, oh, I'm just nervous, like I got to get rid of this. But it is the body doing its best to help us rid ourselves of the cortisol and other stress hormones that are in the way of us feeling regulated. So,
Mhm.
as soon as we can learn a nervous system reset that is in our control because we get to intentionally lead ourselves there, then all of the other parts of the process can become effective. So, that's huge, huge,
Mhm.
huge.
Wow.
After that, there's three pillars. The first is all about the emotional work. So I call it compassionate emotional processing. And that is not only understanding, again, from a logical level, but bringing into our body this processing of past trauma, whether big T or small t trauma, it's anything that was less than nourishing, that created the way the world is for us, our perspectives, our subconscious beliefs, and moving that stuck energy out of the body. So often we have the suppressed emotions that we're continuing to carry with us. Like for me, it was anger. I saw a lot of anger out there. That was the monster. And as soon as I realized I hold that same energy within myself, it was like, oh, whoa, no, 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 no. Get back down, Mr. Dragon. Like you're not expressing yourself right now because I don't want to be him. So, yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, wow, it relates for me, the anger piece,
Mm,
because I would deeply suppress my anger because it reminded me of a certain masculine figure in my life, in my childhood. And I was disgusted by that energy. So I repressed it so much.
mm,
And allowing myself to own, wow, I have that in me too. And how do I use it in ways that are enlivening? For me, in my work, it's enlivening. How do we create passion from it and not use it in ways that damage the relationship and maybe what we witnessed in childhood? But letting ourselves feel that emotion, which I love. I was so excited when you're talking about anger because it's a powerful emotion that carries fuego and pasión and depth when we can
mm.
channel it, or and when we can move the charge through the body. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it is such a passionate energy and it can lead to so much productivity and action from a place that's aligned. And what I love about anger is that it really is this goalpost that shows us, are we in alignment or not? When something makes us angry, it's largely a representation of where are my boundaries crossed right now? And therefore, what was my truth that I don't feel like I'm in alignment with, or someone is not in alignment with, and I require to speak up for myself in order to create that container of truth.
Wow, I love that reframe so much because it's reminding everyone listening that it's a sign, it's a messenger. It doesn't have we don't have to be at war with the anger. How do we befriend it and see what's the mirror, what's the medicine in there?
Yeah, I love that. And the keyword messenger is such a helpful one too. And I really do believe that emotions are like messengers. They come up to our front door, They knock and they're like, hey, I'm here. I have a message to deliver. And we, because we've developed this fear of especially the more intense emotions, we look through that peephole and we're like, oh my God, no, I'm not opening the door to this one. I don't have the space for it. I'm too busy right now. Like, this is not okay. And so we let the messenger wait outside of our front door until they become a little bit more like, you
Mm.
know, wanting to finally deliver this message and go on their way. And so they start banging the door and they create even more chaos. We're tuning up our distractions on our end, whether it's, TV or music or working to try to drown them out. And at a certain point, we have to face that messenger. And all they wanted to do is deliver the lesson, deliver the message, have us feel it, move through our bodies so then they can deliver that and go on their way. But we made their job so hard and we actually made it a lot more difficult for ourselves than it needed to be. If we just opened the door, had a cup of tea with them, and it's like, okay, thanks. I got it. I got what you were
Mhm.
trying to tell me.
Oh, you're making
So,
me just like have laughter and joy for like, ugh, the humanity of it all and all these coping mechanisms to numb out, to avoid ourselves, our feelings, part of ourselves.
yeah. And when the message is delivered, the messenger has served its purpose and just doesn't need to stick around. So, yeah, that's the emotional processing part. And in this experience, we can also learn so much about ourselves, about how we perceive certain things. Like for me, productivity was the main holy grail of my value. I needed to achieve, I needed to accomplish, I needed to be productive. And then I started to see, okay, well, rest can be productive. And so I can start to equate rest with productivity. But even in that equation, there was this messed up notion that the only way that rest could be good for me is if it was productive. Can I open my
Mhm.
mind to, well, rest is rest. It has nothing to do with productivity and it's nourishing and it's good and I get to welcome it. So there's
Yeah.
all of these concepts.
Yeah. And what this ties for me is to the beginning of the conversation when you spoke about your parents, this dynamic, right? And favoring of the masculine over the feminine. And I see this also in this realm, right? Of favoring of the light over the dark is what we do in our society. We don't, to what you're saying, right? We don't honor those darker emotions. And we also, when you think of favoring the light over the dark, it's this, what are you creating in the light? Versus you have to go inwards. You have to lay the groundwork. We have to be in winter at times to then come back to spring and summer to then be creating out in the light. And so it's honoring both with equal value, the masculine and feminine energetics and all parts of our humanity.
I love that. Yeah. As soon as we put one on the pedestal, the dishonoring of the other just leads to this unexplained imbalance and a continuous moving towards this activity that summer is, that spring are. But the winter serves its purpose. And in the space of the second pillar as well, which is the eroticism, this importance of the cycle of the seasons of life and also our seasons as cyclical beings, right? Both men and women are cyclical beings, but they have a 24-hour cycle. We have about a 28-day cycle. Honoring that pattern and pace of life becomes really important too.
Break
Um,
that down in relationships so that we can make it tangible for those listening. Like, okay, what does that mean then for
yeah,
me? Where
yeah.
am I at?
So in the menstrual cycle itself, let's talk about that piece. And there's also the bigger picture too, and like what stages of relationship we might be in, or what stages of our healing we might be in, healing versus adventurous stage, for example. But we are a completely different person about every week of the month. Not exactly week by week, but in summer, even in the way that I organize my business now, I create the opportunities for socializing, for connection, for podcast interviews,
Oh,
for, client calls. Spring before that is more so the blossoming. It's that creativity starting to come back online. There's more of that desire to be seen. It's a slow build up. So spring, summer, fall is a space for going inwards. And typically in a relationship, this is the time where you may carve out some solo time. And I think in our society, what's missing so often is missing itself. So, how can we create that spaciousness between people to be in their own dynamic, their own energy, see what's processing in the system? Or on the flip side, maybe, our partners, because we are going through such emotional shifts during fall, maybe our partners can, in their awareness of that time of the month, be a little bit more gentle, right? Just know that this is not a time for really important decisions to be made or for relationship dynamics being discussed. And in the business, also for no big business decisions to be made, because we are moving towards this place of shedding, where winter is the ultimate going inward and just releasing and seeing that the intuition is at its highest at that point. It's not a time for connection, it's the connection to self.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of that. But of course, from a business standpoint, relationship standpoint, erotic standpoint, we have very different experiences.
I love that so much. And it gives such permission to the ebbs and flows of relating, of life.
Yeah.
And I also love, Katrin, what you're speaking about, which is this allowing spaciousness in our relationship to separate, to come into our own selves, and which then fuels the intimacy when we reconnect. It allows us to deepen the connection through the separation. And you can still be separated in the quote unquote disconnection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the third pillar. How do you then bring this all home?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the folks as you take them through your process.
Just one more piece I want to mention on the
Yeah.
second pillar is specifically in that sense of disconnection. It's a disconnection in order to connect more deeply. But the erotic languages are quite important in that second pillar when it comes to understanding ourselves and our partners and understanding that dance between the inner masculine and feminine. And this comes from Jaya's work. She's a wonderful sexologist with the erotic blueprints. I highly recommend the show Sex, Love, and Goop to anyone who wants to see the visual representation of that transformation. But the erotic languages and understanding how we are wired for not only sexual arousal, but for connection with another and also for safety, like how our nervous system is wired to feel safe in the bedroom and outside of it. That concept is so important to understand because so often we judge ourselves, right? In the way that eroticism is portrayed in the media. That's typically the sexual erotic language that we see in the media. But the energetic, the sensual, the kinky, and the shapeshifter all have their unique expression. And yeah, seeing the coming together of all the textures of that is a really, really beautiful experience. And because partners are often opposites and opposites attract, it's a really beautiful system to understand, like, where are the meeting points of the different languages between people.
Oh, I love her work so much. Tell me, what's your language? What's your blueprint? I'm guilty. I'm energetic, sensual. I need
Nice.
those. I need those candles. I need to set the stage. I need the scene. Yet the energy is also so important for me. So for me, as an energetic, I am more turned on by the tease, by the build up than the actual act of sex itself.
The cheese is
Yeah.
so yummy, isn't it? I
Oh,
absolutely love the
I,
cheese.
I
The
love it.
ener Yeah, the energetic is a big one in my stack, and I really do believe we all have a certain stack. In my healing stage, while I was still experiencing vaginismus, it was my primary language. Sensual had a place as well. I also had a lot of kinky that I had set aside and had a lot of shame around, and there was this craving of intensity that I didn't quite recognize was so important to me at the time, and still is. And so, probably at the time, I was more so energetic and kinky. And today, I would identify as a shapeshifter. is like, I want it all. I want the variety. I want to be fed in all the ways.
Yes.
So yeah, that's me.
Yes, I love it. And I heard you also speaking to it, which is an aspect of Miss Jaya's work, which is so interesting to just like tease it even more so those who aren't familiar can feel it. But I also love how she talks about the expected emotions and the unexpected emotions, which is what I believe you were speaking to, Katrin, when you're talking about how we're all wired differently, because some people are turned on by these expected emotions of love and of connection and of safety and security. And some people, given our wiring, given our childhood, our early sexual experiences, are guilty also this aspect for me. And that's changed over time with my self-love and rewiring, but also desire that mystery, some of that instability, that lack of safety, that not knowing what your partner's thinking, that also fuels that desire.
That mystery, absolutely. And the dynamic in the kinky one from a psychological perspective too, with that intensity that we crave, ties so beautifully into this concept of the masculine and feminine and what I'd like to call the alpha and the omega, where we, especially us women who may have our life together in many other ways, right? We've got it all figured out. We've worked towards where we wanted to be. We're more or less like things are set. There is a sense of control over our experience outside of the bedroom, and that feels good. We crave to be able to just let go of that and be taken, for that alpha in our partner to be the leader so that we don't have to make any decisions in the bedroom. We could just surrender and relax and enjoy and melt into that intensity. That feels so good in my system. And it, especially in different contexts of life, we got to find the balance, because so many type A personalities, for example, won't be able to really feel completely, deeply relaxed in a state of surrender unless they yank themselves out of that with a sense of intensity in their nervous system. The gentle approaches, like having a massage to be able to lead to turn on, may be not jarring enough for the nervous system to be taken into a state of presence. So that's a very interesting game to play too, is like, what level of intensity works for you?
So how do you recommend one relax? And I recall that this is the last pillar. Part of your last pillar is really coming into the state of deep relaxation. Talk to us about that. Yeah, what that looks like, what that means.
Yeah, that third pillar of the physical release and relaxation, of course, is so connected to the others, and the nervous system reset is so key for this. But here we're adding the layers of having awareness and a sense of control. So it's this paradox of being able to, in a controlled way, bring yourself into surrender.
Mm,
It's that skill that requires the mind to body connection. So, specifically when it comes to our vagina, those pelvic floor muscles that need to be in the state of relaxation in order to accept another human being, that the tools and techniques there, of course, the connection between the breath and the yoni, being able to belly breathe, use full diaphragmatic breathing, and then incorporate what are reverse Kegel exercises. Very often we hear about Kegels, but this kind of energy flow of building the aliveness while keeping the relaxation is a really nice practice there in that physical pillar. And after that, it's introducing whatever pleasure feels like and looks like to us. So, of course, in my journey, a lot of the goal was about penetrative pleasure. It was PIV, penis and vagina, but that's not the goal for everyone. And it's absolutely not the preference for some of the energetics, sensuals, kinkies, whatever their languages are. But in that physical pillar, we really are moving towards involving our yoni in that experience of eroticism, alongside the rest of the body. I don't want to be too specific to vaginismus here, but I'm kind of curious, what does the physical experience of that connection between the masculine and feminine look like to you? And where would you like to take that physical realm?
Mm. I love what you spoke about with regards, Katrin, to the breath. For me, that's been my journey in my own ways of closure with my body and this journey of being able to experience physical intimacy with lovers and stay open to pleasure. And I love how you talk about this reverse Kegel because it's this not tensing, like we're taught in order to have this orgasm, not restricting of the breath, but how do we stay open, tuning into the pleasure, keeping the body open, breathing deeply. And it doesn't have to be about orgasm, but then when you do, should you orgasm, it's a completely different energy when it comes from this space of expansiveness, oxygenating the body and feeling into the body versus this I'm going to be in the mind. I'm going to constrict, I'm going to hold because if I don't get this orgasm now, it's not going to come again, or whatever comes through in the mind, or I need to hurry up, or what are they thinking, or they already orgasmed, and all the things that we can think about on sex. And it's really staying open and feeling into our pleasure, what does feel good, what doesn't feel good. We don't have to assign a label to it, but getting curious about the sensations in the body.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, it's the state of openness. We oftentimes squeeze out an experience of pleasure just because of how we have seen that be expressed outside in society, right? And the media and films. And that is such a learned piece that also has a lot of shame associated with it.
Mm,
I feel like there is this notion of um, let's do it fast. Let's do it for stress relief. Oftentimes we associate sex with stress relief. And so, of course, the experience of stress is also baked in the experience of relief of stress.
mm,
So, how is it that we can expand our capacity to feel the pleasurable sensations from an open, soft, surrendered state of being? And
yeah.
interestingly, I see this spectrum where we have this ball in the middle of it. And on one side, there's the pain part of life. And on the other, there's the pleasure. And quite often, we want to expand our capacity to feel, expand this ball, this sphere, only on the pleasure side, right? We want to feel more pleasure. We want to get to the extremes of multiple orgasms and full body orgasms and astral sexual experiences. But because there's balance in the universe, we've got to expand our capacity to hold the uncomfortable, painful experiences of life in order to be able to grow this sphere in both directions. So sometimes we might wonder to ourselves, why do I feel numb? Why do I feel disconnected? Why is it that I can't access my emotional expression from this joy and playful part of life that we all desire? And the answer lays in being able to feel the uncomfortable sensations and creates a sense of safety with that part of life.
Mm,
So growing the sphere in both directions,
mm,
rather than focusing in on just how do I have more joy, pleasure, and fun in life.
mm. God, I love these inspiring conversations when someone can talk polarity. You get it. She gets it. And yes, it's just like, oh, okay, that's why I just cried my face off after I orgasmed, because it's both and it's okay
Mm.
to feel both, to honor both. I love this so much. Talk to me about Katrina. I always like to ask this question on the podcast, hear what people have got to say. Why does this tie into divine union for you? Like, how does this experience of liberating your pleasure, of working through pain and coming back into the body from the mind, right? Everything that we talked about, how does this relate to inner union with self, sacred union in relationship, and oneness with the cosmos and all that is?
Mm. I love that question. A visual that's coming up is similar to this sphere because there is a connection of absolutely every single piece of our lives to every single other. And being able to access a state of freedom in our emotional expression or in our pleasure, specifically when it comes to sex, is being able to access a state of acceptance of the present moment on every piece of this thread that does connect to itself without shunning any of them out, without trying to put any of them at the forefront as the goal or, the main part of our movie. So every scene of that is connected. And if we can come to a full sense of relaxation, openness, acceptance, love with every part of ourselves, whether it's the physical, the emotional, the mental, that is symbolic and that gives us an access point to be able to also give that and receive that from another human being. And I truly trust that we cannot give to another what we cannot give to ourselves. So if we have a difficulty expressing joy, expressing love, self-love, acceptance to us, of course, we're not going to be able to give that same gift to a partner. And I've been in one particular relationship that I can think of where I just felt like, oh my goodness, like, why doesn't he love me? Why isn't he pouring into me? Why isn't he giving me attention? And it took me time to know that he was trying to give from an empty cup. He wasn't able to access that for himself. And of course, he didn't have enough to share with me. So
Mhm.
that divine union does start within our own cup, overflowing that, letting that waterfall spread to all parts and to the people that we interact with. So, yeah, it all comes down to that self acceptance, I feel like, and the gifting of that to others.
Oh, so beautifully said. Tell me, Katrin, I'm getting so excited. I'm like brain farting because that landed so smoothly. I'm picturing like a plane coming in, landing on this pond, just cutting through that water, and it's glittering off the surface. Where can everyone listening who's like, wow, this is resonating so deeply? Where can they find out more about you, the work that you do, the programs that you're running?
Yeah, thank you. Anyone who's curious, you're welcome to visit my website, katrinwithlove.com, or that very same name on Instagram, Katrin with Love. On the vaginismus side of things, I'm on Instagram at vaginismus.sisters.
Thank you so, so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you to all of you beautiful, beautiful people tuning in to this week's episode of Divine Union. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, may all your unions be divine.